What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to talk about some massive sales that happened in the Heritage Signature Auction this week. Feel like maybe the comic market heard that I was saying that was going down and decided to prove me wrong. So stay tuned to see these incredible books that sold this week. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. Really appreciate all the likes and comments. Love talking to people in the comments and the subscriptions to the channel. It's been great. So like I said in the intro, in this video I'm going to talk about some massive sales that happened in the Heritage Signature Auction this week. And if you've watched any of my prior market videos, I talk about the Heritage auctions quite a bit. I watch them very closely. I think I've said in the last 2 years, if I've missed any, I've maybe missed one or two. And they happen every single week, and some more often than once a week. And so I'm very familiar with the Heritage auctions, and I use them for a lot of my market analysis for tracking the comic market. Now, they do have the weekly auctions. Those are the ones that I use for my market analysis. But they also have what are called signature or platinum auctions that occur generally about once every 2 months, give or take. Now, if you buy from Heritage, like I do, I don't know what threshold it is before when they start sending you these, but I buy a fair amount from them. But they start sending you these books. So these are what cover this, these signature type auctions. So you've got that Promise collection with this one that I talked about in one of my prior videos, and then you've got this book here, which is their signature auction. And they have pictures. It's pretty cool. They have pictures of every book, that's going to sell in that auction. And it's just, they've got little write-ups about a lot of them. So they're a lot of fun to get, just kind of flip through and dream about, maybe owning some of these books, but just, cool pictures, everything like that. Just, it's really advertising material for the auction, but it's still fun to get and take a look through. Because I have bought a few books from their signature auctions in the past. Never from the first day, never from those major books on the first day, but it is fun to look through these and pick some of those up. And they, on average, have much higher end books. And the first day of that auction, which was on June 17th, they have massive high-end books. And there's only usually a few of them, and it's just a few of those books all go back to back. It's actually a live auctioneer instead of an automated auction. So it has more of that traditional auction feel. And this week, there were 20 books that were in that auction for that first day, and those 20 books combined sold for $2,734,500, so an average of $135,000 per book. So that kind of gives you an idea what level these books are selling at. Now, there were some awesome high-end books in this sale, and the prices that they hit have definitely shown that this market has more to give. It's not given up the ghost quite yet. And I'm only going to talk about 11 of those books of the 20. I'm not going to go through all 20, but I picked out 11 that I think were just the most interesting, most fun to talk about. So let's get into those books. All right, so the first book that I'm going to talk about is none other than Action Comics #1. This was a CGC 5.5 conserved that sold for $528,000. And that was a record for this book. This is a book clearly that everybody knows. First appearance of Superman, most desired comic book on the planet. And the restoration on this one, you can see, is it's a conserved book, which is just, I've talked about that in my restoration video. It means that it's restored, but it has to be a restoration of type A1, and it can't improve the appearance of the book. You can't add pieces to the cover, that kind of thing. And so the conservation on this book was the cover was cleaned, cover was reinforced, and the staples were replaced. And this same book, 5.5 conserved, actually this exact same book, sold for $393,000 in June of 2017. So it's a new record for this book. It's an increase of 34% in the last 4 years, which that might not sound like a lot, but books like this aren't really purchased for their massive gains usually. It's not like it's a spec book that you're buying. It's a book that's a statement piece, that you own one of the copies of Action Comics 1. There are only 73 total copies on the census, so you're lucky to have any copy of it, whether it's conserved, universal, restored, qualified, whatever it is. So just an incredible book, over $500,000 for it, so huge sale. Now, you're going to know all these books for the most part. I think there might be one or two maybe that you're not familiar with. But the next sale was Amazing Spider-Man number 129, and this was a CGC 9.8 that sold for another record of $40,800. First appearance of Punisher, one of the best covers from the Bronze Age, and it's just one of the most in-demand books from that time period. And I've said this before, I think this has been an undervalued book. I think it's going to move up very similar to Giant Size X-Men number 1, which I'll talk about in a bit because one of those sold too. And the prior record for this book was $33,600, and that was just on May 3rd. So that's a jump of 21%, just a little over a month. And a year ago, this book was $11,000, so it's up 270% in a year. And that's about as strong a performance as we've seen in almost any other major book, in the 200 to 300% range. But I still think this book has some room to grow. I still think it's undervalued for this grade and basically all the grades below it as well. There are a lot of them out there, though. There are 147 blue labels in a 9.8, and I believe there are over 10,000 graded copies. So there's a lot of them out there, but there's a lot of demand for that book. It is one of the most popular characters, and like I said, just an iconic cover. Now for the next book, we had an Action Comics number 1, and we also had a Detective Comics number 27. And a CGC 5.0 sold for $1,125,000, which is a record for that book in that grade. I mean, this was the big boy of this sale. Between that book and Action Comics 1, that made up over 50% of the total sales of those 20 comic books in that initial day of that auction. So these two were the two real big ones. And it's first appearance of Batman, second really only to Action Comics 1 in my mind in terms of demand from collectors. And for a lot of people, it might be even more desirable than Action Comics number 1. Now, 5.0 sold for $569,273 in March of 2018. So this is up 98% in 3 years. That is a huge jump for a book that was $500,000. It is now over $1 million for that book. I mean, for comparison though, with Action 1, a 5.0 in 2018 of Action 1 sold for $815,000. So it was quite a bit more expensive than Detective Comics 27. It probably still would be today, but it would be interesting to see an exact comparison of the same grade of both of those books selling around the same time to see which book really is the most valuable book now, either Action Comics 1 or Detective Comics 27. It's also a very rare book. There are only 74 total copies on the census with just 36 blue labels. And I saw a picture today on Instagram that Nerdy Girl from Nerdy Girl Comics, she has a 5.0 of this book, so she's got to be pretty happy with that sale today. All right, so now the next one is also Detective Comics. This is Detective Comics number 38. It's a 5.0 as well, sold for $78,000, which is another record in this grade. Just an iconic cover. First appearance of Dick Grayson as Robin. And a 5.0 hasn't sold for a while though, but the prior high was $28,680 in 2014. So it's an increase of 172% since then. So that is quite a bit for a book that costs that much. Now, this book has grown in popularity a lot since then. It is, I would say, the third or fourth most desirable book in all of Batman and Detective Comics. You've got Tech 27, Tech 31, which is the iconic cover. Then you have Batman number 1, first appearance of Joker and Catwoman, and then you've got this, Detective Comics number 38, the first appearance of Robin. It is one of the Detective Comics books I kind of have a dream to own someday. Prices keep going up. It may not become very likely, but it is one that I would love to be able to have one day. But it is quite rare. There are only 135 copies on the census, and only 70 of those are blue labels. So again, it's a book that's not very common. It's tough to come across. You don't see them sell very often, and they are getting more and more expensive. Now, for the first Silver Age book of this auction, it's Fantastic Four number 48 in a CGC 9.8, sold for another record of $108,000. Now, this is the first appearance of Silver Surfer, first cameo appearance of Galactus. This was a massive sale. The prior record was $42,500 from August of last year, so that's a jump of 154% in less than a year, which is on par with the lower grades. So that is an extremely impressive sale for a book that's a 9.8 for the really high end. And the other thing was, I've actually been seeing a weakening in the sales for this book recently, but this may turn that around. I've talked about that before with Batman 181 and Tech 359, the first appearance of Poison Ivy and first appearance of Batgirl. When those books had big 9.8 sales, they drove up the prices of the lower grades, and it's possible that we could see that return strength to those lower grades of that book. We'll have to see how that all plays out. Now, there are actually quite a few copies of this book in a 9.8. There are 39 copies on the census in a 9.8, and the reason for that is that if you're not aware, there was actually a warehouse find of this book. What that means is someone at some point found basically boxes of these books that were from the printer that were never distributed. And so when that happens, it often lowers the value of those books. And so for quite a while, a 9.8 of Fantastic Four 49, I believe, was selling for more than a 9.8 of 48. I don't know if that's still true today, but that was the case because of that warehouse find. So just something interesting about that book that I think makes this high sale even more impressive. Now, the next book is one that I talked about just a few minutes ago, and that's Giant Size X-Men #1. 9.8, had a record $72,000 sale. And this is the first appearance of the new X-Men, Colossus and Storm and Nightcrawler. And like I said, I was talking about this book with 129, and I feel like 129 is just kind of chasing that book right now. And the prior record was 60,000 on Comic Connect back in April. So it's a jump of 20% in just a couple of months for a book that's tens of thousands of dollars. So that's very impressive. And I also want to point out that, again, like that Comic Connect book, this was an off-white to white pages book. And so the two highest sales for this book are off-white to white pages. So don't get caught up with page quality. The book and the grade by far are the most important factor when you're talking about pricing for these books. Now, for the increase in price of this book, this was a $14,000 book a year ago. It is up 414% in a year, which is just incredible. I mean, that is possibly the most of any book that I've looked at. So that is a huge gain for a book in just 1 year. And there are quite a few of these 9.8s out there. I mean, it's a Bronze Age book. So there are 195 9.8s of this book and 10,400 total on the census, with 9,287 being blue labels. So there's a lot of them. There's a lot of those books out there. But it's hard to say where this one's going to stop, because clearly the demand is out there for this book. And we haven't had any news about the X-Men. We don't know when they're coming. I think we're all pretty sure we'll see them eventually, but this book has been going up on no news right now, and it is just one of the biggest gainers out there. Now, the next book, this was the book that was just the talk of this auction after this sale happened. Just mind-blowing. I don't think anybody saw this sale coming. This was Marvel Spotlight #5 in a 9.8 that sold for $264,000. That is a Bronze Age book selling for over $250,000. This is the first appearance of Ghost Rider. I mean, this number, it's insane. It crushes every other Bronze Age 9.8 that's out there. I mean, I was even just talking about Silver Age 9.8s, Fantastic Four 48, and it sold for 2.5 times what that book sold for. And so if you look at other Bronze Age 9.8s, Giant Size X-Men #1, 72,000. X-Men 94, 63,000. Hulk 181, 59,500. Now, that sale was back in February, so it's probably a $100,000 book now. But even at that, this is a $264,000 book. It is crazy that Ghost Rider, who is, I mean, he's a popular character, but he is not a top tier character. And for him to be the most valuable Bronze Age book and more valuable than most Silver Age keys is just, it's mind-blowing. It's crazy. And now, one of the reasons people will argue for why this one sold for so much is that there are only 4 9.8s on the census. It is an extremely difficult book to get in high grade because of the black cover, but still, you have to have the demand out there to meet that supply, and that means there were at least 2 people willing to pay over $250,000 because of the steps up in that book. So just incredible. Now, there weren't any prior sales in a 9.8, at least that I could find on public records. There's nothing to compare to, so it was clearly a record. But again, there's been no news about this character. We don't know if we're going to see them. I mean, just this was the kind of the mind-blowing sale of this auction. All right, now the next one, this is one that you may or may not be familiar with. It's a Golden Age book. This is Shock Suspense Stories number 6. And this was a CGC 9.8 that sold for $26,400. This is a classic pre-code horror bondage cover, and you may be surprised, but there are generally 9/8 or higher of almost every single one of these EC pre-code horror books. And I mean, this book is from 1952. This book is almost 70 years old now, and it actually even has 2 9.9s. So this isn't even the highest graded book. And the thing is, there are what are called file copies with these books. So either the editor or one of the writers, something like that, stored away a copy right when it was printed, and they tend to be an extremely high grade. So there are these 9/8s out there for just about every one of these books. Now, the prior record was $18,350 in November of 2018, so it's up 44%, which is respectable for a book like this. But the main reason I wanted to show this book is that this auction also had the original art for this book. And that original art for just the cover sold for $840,000. That is 30 times the price of a 9.8. I mean, original cover art is just... that is another animal. It is astounding a lot of times how much those actually go for, how much those covers sell for, and this is a perfect example of that. I mean, you had a 9.8 in the same auction, and the original cover art sold for 30 times as much, $840,000, one of the biggest sales of the day. Now, the next book, I love this book. This is Silver Surfer, number 4, CGC 9.8, sold for a huge record, $90,000. And this was another one that was a pretty big shock. This is a classic Silver Surfer cover, arguably one of the best covers of the Silver Age, and the prior high was $17,900 from just July of last year. So this is a jump of a little over 400% in less than a year. Just a huge jump for this book. And there's actually quite a few 9/8s out there because this is a late Silver Age book. I believe it's 1969. And so there are 24 9/8s of this book, and so it's pretty prevalent. So that's a big sale. It is one of the most desirable books out there. It's not even really a key; it's just an awesome cover, and I think that is really cool. That effectively a cover buy goes for $90,000 in a 9/8. But yeah, just awesome Silver Surfer cover, battling Thor, huge sale. Now the next one. It was a record, but it's actually, in my mind, kind of a weak sale. This was Tomb of Dracula, number 10, in a CGC 9.8, sold for $28,800. And I think maybe it's just seeing all those other really big sales, especially of the Bronze Age book like Marvel Spotlight number 5, hitting just such massive numbers that 28,000 just felt kind of low. This was a slight record. The prior high was 25,000 on April 18th. Now, something I want to point out, if you are someone that follows Go Collect, that's what I use for a lot of this. I also use Cover Price. Go Collect actually has the incorrect price for this book for that high sale. The correct price is actually $25,000, which is on Cover Price. I also confirmed it with Terapeak Research, which is a free research tool that's available with eBay, because it was an eBay sale, so I can see what the actual sales price was. The book was listed at $36, but it sold for $25. Now, I reported it to Go Collect through their feedback, and they're usually really good about updating sales like that, so I'm sure they'll get around to updating it, but just something that I thought was important, because even though I trust a lot of data that's out there, it is good to check if there's anything that seems like it's off, to make sure you double check things, and that's why I do use 2 sources, and sometimes I also check eBay as well when I'm pricing out books. Now, this is a record of $3,800 or 15%, so it's not insignificant, but again, when we're talking about these massive sales with these other books, and this also only has 47 Blue Label 9/8, so it's a relatively scarce book in a 9/8, it feels like a weak sale. So I think this book has a lot of room to run on it, especially in this grade. And I think when we start to get news about the movie, be a little more on casting, filming, that kind of thing, I could see this book jumping a lot. All right, now the last book I'm going to talk about is Wiz Comics, and it's number 1 and kind of number 2 because it's actually the first issue, but it says 2 inside the cover, so it's a little confusing. But this was a CGC 3.0 that sold for $78,000, which was a record for this book. This is basically the Action Comics #1 of Fawcett. It's the first appearance of Captain Marvel, and the reason I wanted to talk about this one is I felt bad for a guy that I follow on Instagram. I buy books from him. I talk with him somewhat regularly, and this is Hiram, if you've heard me mention him before. He was going after this book. He had been selling a bunch recently to try to build up money to buy this book, and he just missed out on it. He posted a video of him bidding for it on Instagram, and his max was $80,000. And so you see it sold at 78, but the next bid was 81. And I respect him for sticking to his guns, having that threshold and not going over it. It takes a lot of restraint to do that. And I follow very similar rules when I'm buying books. I have limits I set on books that I'm looking at, and I am very strict on what I allow myself to pay for a book. So I get it, but it must be tough because it's a rare book. It doesn't come up for sale very often. There's only 55 copies on the census and only 27 blue labels, so this was one of those 27. Prior record was 52,580 from May of 2015, so an increase of 48%. Not a huge amount. There's not nearly as much demand for Fawcett books compared to DC or Marvel, but still, this is, I think, like I said, it's basically the Action Comics #1 of Fawcett. It's a huge book for the Golden Age, and so feel bad that Hiram wasn't able to pick this one up. Hopefully he gets a chance in the future and he can find another book that he can get with that. So so good luck to him on finding that. So that's all the sales that I wanted to talk about. Just an incredible auction. Like I said at the beginning, over $2.7 million in sales from just 20 books. So really cool to see those books, see those sales for those books. So I just thought it'd be fun to talk about those. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got videos, to click links on over here, and subscription button down here if you want to click on that. I'd really appreciate it if you enjoyed this and if you've made it to the end. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.